Most astronauts count the days until they can come home. Valery Polyakov did the opposite. In 1994, deep inside the Mir space station, this Russian physician made a decision that would terrify his family and baffle mission control. He refused his scheduled return to Earth, choosing to stay in orbit alone for over 437 days. His body began to break down. His loved ones begged him to come home. But for Polyakov, the frontier of space meant more than safety or even family. Why would someone choose the void over the world below? And what did it cost? This is the cosmonaut who refused to return to Earth. And what happened next would rewrite the limits of human endurance. January 8, 1994. Soyuz TM-18 lifts off from Baikonur, carrying Valery Polyakov to the Mir space station. The mission brief calls for 6 months in orbit, a duration that already pushes the boundaries of human physiology. On the ground, flight surgeons track every heartbeat, every data point. Bone loss, muscle atrophy, immune suppression. The risks mount with each passing week. By the 180-day mark, the standard return window opens. Cosmonauts before Polyakov have come home at this point, their bodies battered by microgravity, but still recoverable. Mission Control sends up the coded message: the next crew rotation is ready. Return is approved. Polyakov's response is blunt. He declines the offer, citing unfinished science. The Mir modules echo with the static of ground-to-space debate. Biomedical teams warn of irreversible changes if he stays longer. The numbers are stark. Up to 20% bone density loss, muscle strength dropping fast, cardiovascular deconditioning creeping in despite 2 hours of daily exercise. Polyakov logs his own symptoms: joint pain, fatigue, sleep disruption. Still, he insists the mission continues. Inside the cramped station, he doubles down on self-experimentation. Blood draws, muscle tests, psychological surveys. He becomes both subject and scientist. The ground teams escalate their monitoring. Internal memos circulate at Roscosmos. What if he collapses? What if the data ends in tragedy? But Polyakov holds to his decision. He tells the medical team, "It is too soon. We do not know enough yet. My mission must continue, for science and for our future." As the return window closes, the tension lingers. Mir spins on. Polyakov crosses the threshold into the unknown, pushing past the point every cosmonaut before him had turned back. For the first time, the question isn't just how long a person can survive in space, but what happens when someone chooses to stay. Valery Polyakov's sense of purpose was forged long before he ever strapped into a Soyuz capsule. As a young physician in Moscow, he watched the first cosmonauts become national heroes, their faces plastered across banners and textbooks. But for Polyakov, the real frontier was not fame. It was the unanswered question: could a person truly survive the journey to Mars? He carried that question through medical school, through years of clinical research, and into the selection process for the Cosmonaut Corps. By the time he arrived on Mir, his motivation had hardened into something close to doctrine. "My mission must continue, for science and for our future," he told ground control, echoing a line he'd repeated for years. On Earth, daily life didn't pause for his absence. Polyakov's wife and daughter managed birthdays, holidays, and the static of long-distance calls that always ended too soon. Friends described his wife as supportive but increasingly anxious, aware that each month away raised the odds of lasting harm. Letters from home when they arrived spoke of longing and confusion. Why risk everything for one more experiment? Why stay when the world below was waiting? Polyakov's replies grew shorter, more clinical, focused on research results and technical updates. The warmth faded, replaced by the language of a man who saw himself as both subject and instrument of science. Colleagues and psychologists noted his remarkable resilience. Pre-flight assessments had flagged him for exceptional stability under pressure. He seemed to thrive on routine, on the closed loop of experiment and analysis. Even as the days stretched into months, Polyakov's journals rarely mentioned loneliness. Instead, he wrote about datasets, protocols, and the logic of pushing further. For him, the discomfort, the distance, even the strain on his family, these were necessary sacrifices. Every extra day in orbit was another step toward proving that the human body and the human mind could outlast the void. For Polyakov, the mission was never just about coming home. It was about making sure humanity could someday leave it behind. Inside Mir's narrow corridors, Polyakov's body began to unravel. The medical logs track it in cold numbers. Bone density in his spine and hips dropped by nearly 20%. Muscle mass in his legs and back withered by up to 30%. Even 2 hours a day strapped to the treadmill or wrestling with resistance bands couldn't halt the decline. Every movement became a negotiation. Joints ached, grip strength faded, and simple tasks left him winded. The cardiovascular system, built for gravity, started to lose its edge. Blood pooled in the upper body, the heart shrank slightly, and early signs of orthostatic intolerance crept in, meaning Polyakov's body was forgetting how to stand up against gravity at all. He recorded spells of dizziness, a racing pulse after exercise, and a new kind of fatigue that seeped into his bones. Flight surgeons on the ground ramped up the protocols. More blood draws, more muscle tests, more questions about sleep and appetite. Polyakov responded with the discipline of a field medic, logging every symptom, adjusting his routine, refusing to let the data slip. But the numbers didn't lie. With each passing week, the cost of staying aloft was written deeper into his flesh. The station's hum, the endless circling of the Earth, became the backdrop to a slow and measured breakdown, one that no countermeasure could fully stop. Mission psychologists began to notice a subtle recalibration in Polyakov's mindset. Early on, he kept his focus on protocols and data points, but as months accumulated, his self-reports shifted. He described a growing sense of detachment from Earth, a kind of mental drift that didn't fit any checklist. The Mir station, with its endless hum and predictable cycles, became more than a place of work. It was a world with its own rules, a closed loop that offered clarity and control. Polyakov started referring to himself in his journals as a space person, a term that quietly replaced the labels of husband, father, or doctor. The mission's behavioral data tracked more than mood swings or sleep patterns. There were long stretches where Polyakov reported feeling calm, almost serene, despite mounting physical strain. He described the orbit as a place of peace, even as his body wore down. Psychologists on the ground debated whether this was resilience or something closer to adaptation, bordering on obsession. The longer he stayed, the more the idea of returning to Earth lost its appeal. Routine became ritual. The isolation, once a challenge, turned into a source of identity. Polyakov wasn't just surviving in space, he was becoming someone who belonged there, even as the world below faded into abstraction. March 22nd, 1995. The Soyuz capsule lands hard on the frozen Kazakh steppe after 437 days in orbit. Recovery crews brace for the worst. No one has ever spent this long in space. The hatch opens. Polyakov, pale and unsteady, waves off the stretcher. He insists on climbing out himself. Each step is a struggle. His muscles tremble, his joints barely hold. He steadies himself, then walks a few meters across the snow, refusing help. Cameras roll. For the planners dreaming of Mars, this is the proof they need. A human body, battered but upright after a journey longer than any before. Behind the scenes, the toll is clear. Polyakov is rushed into intensive medical checks. The numbers are stark. Nearly 20% bone loss, muscle mass down by a third, blood pressure barely stable. It takes 6 months of rehabilitation before he can walk without pain. Physical therapy, daily monitoring, endless tests. Yet the data he brings back on bone, muscle, heart, mind becomes the foundation for every Mars simulation that follows. For Polyakov, those steps on the step are more than a gesture. They are a line drawn between what once seemed impossible and what now feels within reach. On March 22, 1995, Valery Polyakov stepped out of Soyuz TM-20 after 437 days in orbit, setting a human spaceflight endurance record that remains unbroken. Official Mir mission logs confirm he lost up to 20% of his bone mass and as much as 30% of his muscle strength, yet he insisted on walking unaided on landing, demonstrating the potential for human recovery after extreme isolation. Polyakov's own statements and medical records show he chose to stay, despite family pleas, to prove that missions to Mars could be possible. Some details of his psychological condition and internal communications with mission control remain classified or unpublished. Today, space agencies still rely on Polyakov's medical and psychological data when designing long-duration missions. The full cost of such endurance, on mind and body, remains only partly understood. As of 2024, no one has surpassed Polyakov's record, and his decision stands as both a milestone and a challenge for future explorers.